Greetings everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this video. I am R. Renee with the tithinghoax.com, and in this video I want to share some information and provide some clarity regarding tithing versus sowing and reaping. We recently received an email from someone who wanted us to address this issue. And so instead of just sending this person an email response, I decided to do a video because I think it may help a lot of people who may also be dealing with this issue and may want some further clarification as to the difference between tithing and sowing and reaping and whether there's a relationship between the two. Okay, so let's first lay the groundwork and let me lay out some quick facts about tithing so I can draw the distinction between the biblical practice of tithing and the spiritual principle of sowing and reaping. Okay, now quick facts. Biblical tithing does not consist of money. Again, biblical tithing does not consist of money. Tithing in the Bible consists of money, excuse me, strike that from the record, consists of food and drink, anything that was consumable. Now I already have a video on this platform where I dive into what tithes are. Also, what's important to keep in mind is that everyone in Israel did not pay tithes. For instance, poor people were exempt from paying tithes. Poor people received tithes, but they did not pay tithes. And also, according to the Bible, biblical tithing was only practiced among the Jewish people. Gentiles did not practice tithing. In other words, Christians did not practice tithing. You will not see anywhere in the Bible where Christians or Gentiles practice tithing. So I just kind of wanted to lay down that basic framework for this video and this conversation or this brief teaching on this topic, because we have to go through and go by what's in the Bible, because so many preachers again keep associating tithing with money and keep pushing that tithing doctrine on people and have people, so many Christians, still brainwashed with this whole tithing concept. Now, to zero in even more on this topic, there are a lot of Christians who think what they're doing is practicing tithing, and they look at tithing as a form of sowing and reaping. So they are led to believe that when they sow their money into a ministry or to a pastor, that they're going to then reap from that, maybe 30, 60, or 100-fold, that they sold $10, that they're going to get back 100 or 1,000 or whatever the case may be. So what you have is a situation where some preachers have put tithing and sowing and reaping into the same category, and these two practices are quite different from a biblical perspective. Now, when we talk about tithing, one of the things that makes it distinctive or different from sowing and reaping is that tithing is governed by the law of Moses, or the Mosaic law. That's when tithing became mandatory for Israel, whereas sowing and reaping is an eternal spiritual principle, and I'll get into that later. But tithing is not governed by sowing and reaping. Tithing is governed by the law of Moses, or the Mosaic law. That's why in the Bible you won't see it say that sow a tithe and you will reap a tithe. It's not in the Bible. In other words, the point is you don't see tithing mentioned in the same light as sowing and reaping. In fact, I have a link in the description below, a link with 66 verses in the Bible that make reference to sowing and reaping. And I went through and read through these verses, and the sowing and reaping does not pertain to tithing, because tithing is governed by the law of Moses. And why that's so significant is that the law of Moses is based on obedience. The law of Moses is basically a law of obedience, where the nation of Israel was blessed for their obedience to the law of Moses, which consisted of 613 commandments, and tithing was just one of those commandments. They would be blessed if they followed all of the law. So even if they tithed and didn't do any of the other commandments, or didn't follow any of the commandments, they would be cursed. If they did all of the other commandments or followed all of the other commandments yet didn't tithe, they would still be cursed. The way they would be blessed is if they tithe and did all the other 612 commandments or followed all the other commandments. The law of Moses is about the law of obedience. It was training Israel to be obedient to the commandments of God. So tithing does not fall under the realm of sowing and reaping. It falls under the realm of obedience. But again, because it's the law of Moses, that tithing only pertains to Israel. It only pertains to Jewish people, not Gentiles, not Christians. And of course, it was never speaking of money. It always dealt with, agricultural produce. So I hope that is clear when it comes to the practice of tithing. So now as we enter into the spiritual principle or the spiritual law of sowing and reaping, you can look at these 66 verses that deal with sowing and reaping. You will find that there's no reference to tithing. Again, the Bible doesn't talk about if you sow your tithe, you're going to reap your tithe. In the Old Testament in particular, when you see references to sowing and reaping, is dealing specifically with agriculture, where God, or the Lord, tells Israel that, according to the law of sowing and reaping, when they plant in the field, what they plant, what they sow, that's what they're going to reap, that they're going to reap a harvest. So again, it's dealing with agriculture, is not dealing with money. What they plant, whatever seeds they sow into the field, then they will reap a harvest. Now, when I was looking and reading through these sowing and reaping scriptures, there are instances where Israel would not reap what they have sown. They could sow and not necessarily reap a harvest. And often that was due again to some disobedience with them not following the commandments. But I just say that to point out that sometimes it shows that a people can sow but not necessarily reap anything. So it's just a little something to keep in mind. But more importantly, when the Bible talks about sowing and reaping, especially when we get into the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament, sowing and reaping, the verses or the scripture or the Bible is really dealing with issues as relates to one's character, your conduct, how you treat other people, where it encourages people to sow justice, to sow forgiveness. So in other words, what you put out is what you're going to get back. Meaning, as we like to say, today, treat people the way you want to be treated. And see, and that's the overall message of sowing and reaping from a biblical standpoint, when it comes to this law of sowing and reaping, is treat others the way you want to be treated. Or as we also like to say, many of us have heard, do unto others as you will have them do unto you. So that falls under the realm of sowing and reaping, and that's really what the Gospels in the New Testament stresses. And even when Jesus is talking about sowing and reaping and making reference to it, yes, he does use he uses agriculture in his parables because that was something that people could relate to. But again, it's all about teaching people how to conduct themselves and be mindful of how they treat others, because the way you treat other people is ultimately will be the way you're going to be treated. Okay, what you give out is what you're going to receive. What you sow, you shall reap. There's one passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 6 through 11, where the Apostle Paul is talking about giving. And here we are talking about things of a monetary nature. When he says, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. And he talks about people giving and being a cheerful giver. Now, I also have a video on this I go into detail and break down this passage. But even in this situation, even if the Apostle Paul is talking about money in this specific instance, we have to keep in mind that this is not a commandment he makes to anybody. He's really encouraging people to have a spirit of generosity. That is nothing wrong with wanting to give and to give voluntarily, but giving, not tithing, but giving should never be something as a Christian you ever feel compelled to do, that you ever feel forced to do, that you ever feel coerced to do, that you ever feel pressured to do. It should never be a burden to you spiritually, emotionally, or financially. Unfortunately, what so many preachers have done, again, because they like to mix and match scriptures according to whatever their agenda is. So if they're out to just really trying to get that money and get people to pay money, and say they tell them you got to pay tithes, they want to attach tithing and attach it to sowing and reaping to make people think, whoa, if you sow your money, then you're going to reap this massive harvest. That's just what I wanted to share in regard to understanding what biblical tithing is, giving you a quick overview of that, and giving you a quick overview of the law of sowing and reaping, and how the Bible references the two and how these two things are quite different. Tithing, never money, only practice among the Jewish people, and even all the Jewish people in the nation of Israel, they were not responsible for tithing. And tithing does not fall under the realm of sowing and reaping. It falls under the umbrella of the law of Moses, or the Mosaic law, meaning it is about obedience and being obedient to all of the law, not just tithing, but all the 613 commandments, which again, Gentiles did not follow the law. It didn't pertain to them. Christians, it does not pertain to you. Now we have this eternal principle or spiritual law called sowing and reaping, and in the Bible, throughout the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, particularly in the Old Testament, is actually literally referring to sowing in the land and reaping a harvest from the land. So it's dealing with agriculture. Okay, it's dealing with agriculture, it's dealing with farming, literally dealing with farming. More so now in the New Testament, again, the Gospels, when we're talking about how the Bible deals with sowing and reaping, it's really talking about, again, people's conduct, sowing righteousness, sowing justice, sowing forgiveness. It's about how people treat one another. And so in the reference in Corinthians, the Apostle Paul mentions about sowing and reaping. Again, he's really dealing with people's hearts. And it's not really just money. The money is kind of a side issue. Again, not tithing, but we're talking about voluntary giving. And he's really dealing with the hearts of the saints in developing a spirit giving and a spirit of generosity. So I hope that clarifies what tithing is, and also clarifies what the law of sowing and reaping is, and from a biblical perspective. And if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to list them down below. And don't forget to check out the resource I have for you regarding those 66 verses that relate to sowing and reaping, so you can read them for yourself. And if you need additional information, please visit the tithinghoax.com. We have some blog posts over there, and information and content over there. And also, you can get a copy of the Tithing Hoax, which is on sale right now at Amazon.com on Kindle and paperback. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be blessed, and I'm through.